We often observe friends who finally leave a restrictive job or a stifling relationship, only to immediately recreate the same rigid structure elsewhere. They speak of freedom as their highest goal, yet they seem paralyzed once the walls they complained about are finally taken down. You might notice how they fill their newfound time with meaningless rituals or seek out new authority figures to tell them what to do. It is easy to see this irony in others, but far more difficult to notice when we are quietly building our own familiar cages. True autonomy often feels less like a victory and more like a vacuum that the mind is desperately trying to fill with old noise. Most people spend their lives viewing freedom as the ultimate reward, believing that the removal of external pressure will lead to instant peace. When the boss leaves the room or the lease ends, there is a brief moment of relief that quickly turns into a strange anxiety. We observe this in the person who retires after 40 years of labor, only to find themselves pacing the house, unable to exist without a schedule. This is not a lack of imagination or a personal failure of character, but a deeply rooted survival mechanism that prioritizes predictability over choice. The mind views a known cage as safer than an unknown field because in the cage, the threats are visible and the rules are clear. Psychologically, what we call freedom is often experienced by the brain as a dangerous loss of external structure and a sudden lack of direction. Eric Fromm explored this paradox, noting that modern humans often flee from the very independence they claim to desire because it feels like isolation. When you have no one to please and no one to resist, you are forced to confront the heavy silence of your own internal landscape. Most people first notice this pattern in someone close to them, perhaps a friend who wins the lottery but continues to live like a pauper. They have the resources to change everything, yet they cling to the familiar discomforts because those discomforts provide a sense of identity and safety. Without the weight of external expectations, the individual often feels weightless in a way that is terrifying rather than liberating or life-affirming. The brain interprets this weightlessness as a lack of ground, triggering a frantic search for something or someone to provide a new set of limits. We see this when someone leaves a demanding cult or a high-control group, only to join another organization with even stricter rules and higher demands. The survival instinct prefers the certainty of being told what to do over the agonizing responsibility of deciding what is worth doing for oneself. This is where the pattern becomes difficult to ignore, as the desire for liberty is consistently undermined by the biological need for a clear hierarchy. We frame our lives around breaking free, yet we rarely consider that our nervous systems have been calibrated for the very struggle we want to escape. The removal of the obstacle does not remove the habit of pushing against it, leaving us pushing against thin air and losing our balance. Imagine a person who finally finished a grueling degree, only to feel a sense of profound mourning rather than the expected joy of completion. The structure of the school gave them a reason to wake up, a metric for success, and a clear path to follow every single day. Without the syllabus, they are forced to define their own value, a task for which the modern survival instinct is almost entirely unprepared to handle. This is the hidden trap of the liberated mind, where the absence of a master creates a frantic internal search for a new form of bondage. We tell ourselves we want to be free, but what we often truly want is a more benevolent set of chains that feel less heavy. Freedom requires a level of internal regulation that many people have never been required to develop, leaving them vulnerable to any passing external influence. In this state, the mind becomes a vacuum, pulling in any available distraction or dogma to avoid the terrifying reality of its own total agency. What looks like a simple transition to a better life is actually a complex psychological crisis where the self must learn to exist without mirrors. If the environment no longer provides the reflection of who you are through its demands, you are left staring into a void of your own making. This is not a moral failing, but a biological reality of a creature designed to navigate social hierarchies and clear environmental pressures for its own survival. Staying with this uncomfortable psychological truth is the only way to see why we so often run back to the things that once hurt us. The human brain did not evolve to be free, It evolved to survive within the tight, predictable confines of a cooperative social tribe. For our ancestors, being cast out into the total freedom of the wilderness was not an opportunity for self-discovery, but a death sentence. Safety was found in the group, which meant safety was found in following established rules, hierarchies, and the clear expectations of the collective. This ancient hardwiring remains within us, making the sensation of total autonomy feel like a biological red alert rather than a personal triumph. We are born into a state of absolute dependency, where our very existence relies on our ability to read and follow another person's cues. From the earliest moments of childhood, we learn that love, food, and protection are the rewards for conforming to the family's established structure. A child who is given too much freedom too early often becomes frantic, searching for the boundaries that signal where they end and the world begins. Psychologist Erik Erikson suggested that our early development is a battle between autonomy and a sense of deep, pervading shame and doubt. If the environment is too rigid, we learn to survive by being small. If it is too chaotic, we learn to survive by seeking control. Most people first notice this pattern in someone close to them, like a sibling who still asks for parental permission well into their 30s. They have been conditioned to believe that their own internal compass is broken, and that only an external authority can validate their choices as correct. As we grow, the school system replaces the parent, reinforcing the idea that progress is only real if it is measured by an outside grader. We learn to value the gold star and the high mark, effectively outsourcing our sense of worth to an institution that provides the script. By the time we reach adulthood, the muscles required for self-direction have often atrophied from a lifetime of following the path laid by others. The mind learns to associate the presence of a guide or a rule book with a reduction of the stress hormone cortisol in the body. Consequently, when we finally achieve the freedom we claim to want, the sudden lack of cortisol-reducing structure causes a spike in systemic anxiety. The survival instinct kicks in, interpreting the open horizon as a lack of shelter, prompting us to look for the nearest available mental ceiling. This is why a person raised in a high-pressure home often feels estranged, knowing guilt when they finally have a day with nothing to do. The absence of a task feels like a failure of character, because their survival was once tied to their utility to someone more powerful. What looks like procrastination or laziness in a free person is often a frozen state of waiting for orders that are never coming. We are like a bird that has lived its entire life in a cage, only to find the door open and realize it has forgotten how to fly. The bird does not stay because it loves the cage, but because the cage is the only place it knows how to be a bird. This conditioning creates a deep psychological rift where the conscious mind wants choice, but the subconscious mind perceives choice as a fatal burden. We are effectively trained to be high-functioning dependents, capable of great things only as long as someone else defines what those great things are. This is where the pattern becomes difficult to ignore, as we realize our freedom is often just a change of management from others to ourselves. But when we become our own managers, we usually find we are the harshest and most confused supervisors we have ever had the misfortune to meet. We recreate the pressure of our childhoods because the pressure is the only thing that makes us feel grounded and real in the world. The origin of our struggle with freedom is not a lack of willpower, but a lifelong training program in the comfort of being told what to do. Staying with this uncomfortable psychological truth reveals that we are often more afraid of our own potential than we are of any external master. In our social lives, the struggle with freedom manifests as a quiet, desperate search for others to define our personal boundaries for us. We see this most clearly in romantic relationships, where one partner may claim they want a relaxed, open connection, but then creates constant conflict. The conflict serves a hidden purpose. It provides a familiar friction that proves the other person is still there and still paying close attention. Without the drama or the rules, the relationship feels too light, and the mind begins to wonder if the connection even exists at all. Most people first notice this pattern in someone close to them, perhaps a friend who only dates people who are controlling or emotionally demanding. They complain about the lack of space, but the moment they are single, they feel a sense of profound vertigo and social aimlessness. They have spent so much time reacting to the needs of another that they no longer know how to act on their own behalf. In the workplace, this dynamic plays out as the employee who excels under a micromanager but falls apart in a creative, remote environment. They have the skills, but they lack the internal engine to start the day without the pressure of a looming deadline or a boss. When given the freedom to set their own hours, they find themselves paralyzed by the infinite possibilities of how to spend their energy. Socially, we often use the opinions of our peer group as a substitute for the rigid laws we claim to have outgrown in adulthood. We look to trends, social media consensus, and cultural norms to tell us what to wear, how to speak, and what to value. This is a form of voluntary bondage where we trade our individual autonomy for the safety of belonging to a predictable social tribe. The survival instinct tells us that being free and different is a risk that could lead to social death or total isolation. Consequently, we use our freedom to carefully curate a life that looks exactly like everyone else's, ensuring we are never truly standing alone. What looks like a personal choice is often just a sophisticated imitation of the most dominant voices in our immediate social circle or feed. This is where the pattern becomes difficult to ignore, as we realize how much of our personality is just a reaction to others. In families, the person who finally moves away often finds themselves calling home every day to report their smallest, most mundane life decisions. They are physically free, but psychologically they are still tethered to the approval of the people they were supposed to have left behind. The freedom they achieved is a hollow shell because their internal sense of self is still managed by a remote authority figure's voice. We also see this in friendships where people compete to see who is the busiest, equating a lack of free time with high social status. To have a completely open schedule is socially perceived as being unwanted or unimportant. So, we fill our freedom with obligations we hate. We manufacture a sense of being needed to avoid the terrifying realization that no one is actually watching us or checking our progress. By keeping ourselves socially busy, we ensure that we never have to face the daunting task of deciding who we are without an audience. The social expression of our fear of freedom is a constant, frantic effort to stay relevant within the cages of other people's expectations. We frame these social pressures as burdens, but we carry them willingly because they prevent us from having to navigate the void of choice. If we were truly free to do anything, we might realize that we have no idea what we actually want to do with our lives. Staying with this uncomfortable psychological truth means acknowledging that our friends and partners are often just the walls we use to feel safe. Modern life presents us with the ultimate psychological irony. We have more choices than any generation in human history, yet feel more trapped. Technology has dismantled the traditional barriers of time and space, promising a world where we can work, play, and connect whenever we choose. However, the survival instinct does not handle infinite choice well, leading to a state of perpetual cognitive overload and a longing for simplicity. We are surrounded by digital tools that claim to liberate us, yet they often act as sophisticated tracking devices for our own mounting anxieties. Most people first notice this pattern in someone close to them, like a colleague who checks their work emails at 3 in the morning. They are no longer in a physical office, but the psychological office has expanded to fill every square inch of their private, personal lives. The freedom of remote work has not resulted in more leisure, but in a world where we are never truly off the clock. Society quietly rewards this constant availability, calling it dedication or hustle, while ignoring the slow erosion of the individual's mental sovereignty. The algorithm has become the modern substitute for the village elder, subtly directing our attention and choices toward the most predictable, profitable outcomes. We believe we are browsing freely, but we are actually being funneled into echo chambers that reinforce our existing biases and reduce our complexity. This technological hand-holding provides a false sense of security, sparing us from the effort of having to hunt for information or meaning. What looks like a vast ocean of information is actually a series of carefully curated canals designed to keep us moving in specific directions. The survival instinct finds comfort in these digital loops because they provide a constant stream of microfeedback that mimics social validation and safety. This is where the pattern becomes difficult to ignore, as our devices become the external nervous system we use to regulate our emotions. We see this in the way people feel a sense of nakedness or panic when they are separated from their phones for a few minutes. The device is not just a tool, it is the structure that tells us who to be, what to like, and how to feel today. Modern culture also amplifies the fear of freedom by commodifying lifestyle as a set of products that one must purchase to be complete. We are free to choose any identity we want, provided we can afford the clothing, the hobbies, and the aesthetic that signals that identity. This creates a new form of debt-based bondage, where the pursuit of a free life requires a lifetime of labor in a cubicle. We work jobs we dislike to buy things we do not need to impress people who are also struggling with their own lack of agency. The modern world has perfected the art of giving us the feeling of freedom while keeping the underlying mechanisms of control firmly in place. We are encouraged to be disruptors and individuals, but only within the parameters that the market can quantify, track, and eventually sell back to us. The pressure to live your best life has become a new, crushing expectation that makes any moment of stillness feel like a wasted opportunity. If we are not constantly optimizing ourselves or our surroundings, we feel a sense of evolutionary failure, as if we are falling behind. Staying with this uncomfortable psychological truth reveals that modern freedom is often just a more efficient way to manage a distracted, tired population. Choosing awareness over avoidance is the only way to see how the tools meant to serve us have become our new, invisible masters. When the external noise finally stops, the silence that remains is often more punishing than the loud demands of a difficult employer. We spend decades fighting for the right to be ourselves, only to realize we have no idea who that person is without an adversary. The weight of total agency, a burden that the human nervous system was never designed to carry in isolation for long periods. Most people first notice this pattern in someone close to them, perhaps a retiree who becomes obsessed with a neighbor's lawn or local politics. They have achieved the dream of total autonomy, yet they spend their days manufacturing small, unnecessary wars to give their existence a sense of gravity. This is the final psychological truth. We do not actually want to be free. We want to be meaningful, and meaning requires friction. Without a wall to lean against, we feel as though we are falling through space, clutching at any passing dogma to stop the descent. The realization that you are the sole architect of your life is not a liberating epiphany, but a cold and terrifying clinical fact. It means there is no one left to blame for your boredom, your stagnancy, or the quiet vacuum of your Sunday afternoons. We often stay in situations that diminish us because the pain of being controlled is familiar, while the pain of being free is unknown. The mind would rather suffer in a way it understands than risk a peace that it has not yet learned how to navigate or maintain. This is where the pattern becomes difficult to ignore, as we see our own hands tightening the grip on the things that hold us back. We look at our schedules, our relationships, and our digital habits and realize they are not obstacles to our freedom, but the very things preventing us from having to face it. If you were truly allowed to do anything you wanted starting tomorrow morning, the sheer scale of that emptiness would likely keep you in bed. The survival instinct understands that a creature with no limits is a creature with no shape, and a creature with no shape cannot survive. So, we continue to build our invisible fences, complaining about the height of the wire while secretly checking to make sure the gate is still locked. It is a quiet, ongoing negotiation between the part of us that wants to fly and the part of us that knows the ground, the only thing that is real. Perhaps the reason you feel so tired is not because you are busy, but because you are constantly resisting the terrifying possibility of your own independence. Staying with this uncomfortable psychological truth requires us to admit that the freedom we talk about is a ghost we chase to avoid the present. the next time you find yourself wishing for an escape, it may be worth considering what you would actually do if you were finally, truly let out. It is a question that remains unanswered for most, hanging in the air like a threat that we mistake for a promise. Joining a space where unspoken patterns are examined honestly is the first step towards seeing the bars of the cage you are currently building.